Welcome everyone to this Econ 101 session. Today I'm going to walk through the CPI number and more importantly, why inflation is going to look lower than it really is for the next 9 months. This isn't political, it's not conspiracy, it is not about bad data. It's a combination of how the CPI is calculated and what happened in October, which has created a distorted baseline that will affect future CPI prints. And I want you to really understand why the CPI data is saying what it's saying, and we need to look at the actual CPI table, so it's not just another headline number. This is important. So without further ado, let's get it. So before we get into the nuts and bolts of this thing, let's talk about what CPI actually is and what it actually isn't. Before we even touch on the data, let's clarify this one thing. CPI does not measure whether prices are moving higher. It measures whether prices are higher than they were 12 months ago. That means CPI tracks the rate of inflation. Yes, the rate of inflation, not the level of prices. So inflation can cool, CPI can come down, and nothing in your budget actually gets cheaper. This distinction is critical for everything we're about to look at. So I think this is powerful to show because I think it shows some significant value on where we are today and why it matters. So let's just see what really happened with the CPI data, because this is where the story really shows up. When people see CPI numbers and think, why does inflation look like it's cooling? The answer is right here on this table. So for example, let's look at October. October, you'll notice that it shows no movement across most categories. Why? Well, because we had a government shutdown. The appropriations didn't happen, so there's a government shutdown. So there's no movement or numbers for October, which causes a price distortion for the following month. That happened strictly because, like I said, no data collection, certain prices weren't updated, didn't occur on schedule, and only a very few limited data points were actually included, like gas and new and used vehicles. So October became artificially flat. CPI now treats this month as a baseline moving forward, even if it shouldn't. So what actually moved in October? Well, like I said, gas, new and used vehicles. Again, all of these declined month over month. Let that sink in for a second. The categories that were included just happen to be the ones that are falling, as you can see. October fell in November, October fell in November, etc. So why those three categories matter? Well, gasoline is volatile, right? Gasoline is volatile. And when energy prices fall, well, auto prices typically soften. CPI gets pulled forward, even if everything else stays elevated. Meanwhile, you have things like, let's go over here, like shelter and all these other things are still remaining quite elevated. When we look at shelter and we go all the way over here, shelter still moving higher, maintenance costs still moving higher. I mean, we have hospital services, motor vehicle maintenance and repair, motor vehicle insurance. It's all still moving higher. So these things are still moving higher. They just weren't fully reflected. And the fact that you have a zero number here and these things are still moving higher is something we need to be looking at moving forward, because if those prices continue to move higher, things will feel more expensive. So let's get back on track. So why this makes CPI look lower going forward? Remember, guys, CPI is a year-over-year calculation. So every CPI print moving forward will compare against an October number that showed zero inflation, driven by only 3 declining categories during a period of disrupted data collection. That mechanically makes future inflation look better by comparison, not because prices fell, but because prices or the base was artificially soft. So it's an important clarification because I want to prevent misinterpretation here. This doesn't mean CPI is fake. It doesn't mean inflation is gone. It means the data was incomplete. The categories included were biased downward, and future prints are being measured against that distortion. So CPI will likely understate real inflation pressure for several months, even if your cost of living doesn't improve. So I'm going to give you guys a quick summary. So when you hear inflation is cooling, ask yourself, compared to what? And based on what categories? Because again, in October, only gasoline, new cars, and used cars moved meaningfully, and all three went down. That's the October effect. I want you to understand what we're up against the next 9 months. We're going to be up against a data set that truly doesn't represent what CPI should represent due to a month of missing data. It's important to know that the numbers we're going to be getting are not fully reflective of how we are feeling in this overall economy, especially when housing still moving higher. Owner's equivalent rent, which makes up 30 some odd percent of the CPI data print, still moving higher. Insurance costs still moving higher. New or automobile insurance costs, health insurance costs still moving higher. These are the things that impact us the most. So I wanted to clarify that today, because CPI, even though we're going to be getting some data prints moving forward, will not likely feel like it's moving down. Thank you guys for listening to this Econ 101 session. CPI understated. Until next time.